She stepped out for a fun night with friends, but by sunrise, she had completely vanished. Security cameras captured her walking alone into a dark industrial district, and moments later, she was gone without a trace. What investigators discovered inside an abandoned warehouse would shock an entire nation, and turn an ordinary Friday night into one of the most chilling mysteries America had ever seen. This is the terrifying story of Karen Buckley, and the nightmare that began with one wrong turn in the dark. Karen Buckley had always been the kind of young woman who brought warmth into every room she entered. At 24 years old, she was living in a quiet American college town after moving there to continue her education and chase the future she had dreamed about for years. Friends described her as intelligent, kind-hearted, and deeply loyal to the people she loved. She spent most of her days balancing classes, part-time work, and late-night conversations with friends who quickly became like family. Her life seemed ordinary in the best possible way, filled with coffee shop study sessions, crowded football weekends, and plans for the future that stretched far beyond the small city streets around her. No one could have imagined that one simple night out would soon become the center of a chilling mystery that would leave an entire community shaken. It was a cold Friday evening in early spring when Karen agreed to join several friends for a night downtown. The city was alive with music, flashing lights, and crowded sidewalks as students and young professionals filled restaurants and entertainment districts after a long week. Karen almost stayed home that night because she had assignments due the following week, but her closest friend convinced her to come along for just a few hours. She laughed, changed into a dark jacket and jeans, and promised she would not stay out too late. Before leaving her apartment, she called her mother back in another state and spoke for nearly 20 minutes. The conversation was simple and comforting. They talked about classes, family updates, and future plans. Karen promised she would visit home soon. Neither of them knew it would be the last peaceful conversation they would ever share. The group arrived at a popular entertainment venue near the center of downtown shortly after 10 p.m. Music echoed through the crowded streets, while people moved from one location to another under glowing neon signs. Karen appeared relaxed and happy throughout the night. Friends later remembered how she spent most of the evening laughing, taking photos, and dancing near the stage while a local band performed. Witnesses would later describe her as completely normal that night, friendly, calm, and enjoying herself like everyone else around her. Hours passed quickly, and sometime after midnight, members of the group slowly began leaving one by one. Karen told friends she planned to head home soon as well. Around 1 a.m., security cameras captured Karen walking through a nearby street alone after separating from her group. The city had grown quieter by then, but people still moved through the area as bars and restaurants prepared to close. Karen appeared to be checking her phone while walking toward a transportation pickup area several blocks away. The footage showed nothing unusual at first glance, yet investigators would later study every second repeatedly, searching for even the smallest clue. A few minutes later, another camera recorded her entering a quieter industrial section near a parking structure that connected to older warehouses and service roads. It was an area many people used as a shortcut late at night, though locals often avoided it after dark because the streets became isolated once businesses closed. Back at her apartment, Karen's roommates expected her to return before sunrise. When morning arrived and her room remained empty, concern slowly replaced confusion. Her phone calls went unanswered. Text messages were delivered but never opened. At first, friends assumed she had stayed with someone else after the night out, but as the hours passed, panic quietly spread through her circle of friends. By evening, worried classmates began posting messages online asking if anyone had seen her. Her family was contacted soon afterward, and they immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Karen was responsible and always communicated with someone close to her. Vanishing without explanation made no sense. The local police department officially launched a missing person investigation the next morning. Officers retraced Karen's last known movements through security footage, interviews, and witness statements. Detectives spent hours reviewing camera recordings from nearby businesses, while volunteers searched streets, parking lots, wooded paths, and abandoned industrial areas surrounding downtown. The story spread rapidly across local television stations, and the entire community became invested in finding the young student. Flyers appeared on storefront windows, telephone poles, and college bulletin boards within days. Friends organized search groups despite freezing temperatures and heavy rain that swept across the city during the week. As investigators pieced together Karen's final known hours, one detail began troubling them deeply. Several witnesses recalled seeing a lone man near the isolated industrial route Karen had taken after leaving downtown. Descriptions varied slightly, but enough similarities existed to raise concern. Detectives quietly shifted attention toward the possibility that Karen may have encountered someone dangerous while walking alone through the deserted area. The industrial district itself added to the growing fear surrounding the case. Old warehouses, poorly lit alleys, and abandoned service buildings created a maze of hidden spaces where someone could disappear without being immediately noticed. Days passed with no confirmed sightings. Karen's family arrived in the city and pleaded publicly for information, struggling to remain hopeful while fearing the worst. Her mother stood before cameras outside police headquarters and begged anyone with knowledge to come forward. Friends gathered nearby holding candles during nighttime vigils as reporters documented the growing heartbreak surrounding the investigation. What had started as an ordinary Friday night now felt like the beginning of something dark and deeply unsettling. Then, nearly a week after Karen vanished, investigators made a discovery in the industrial district that changed the entire direction of the case. Officers searching an abandoned building located evidence suggesting Karen had entered the property sometime after leaving downtown that night. The structure had once been used as a maintenance warehouse years earlier, but it now stood mostly empty and rarely visited. Inside, detectives found signs of a struggle that immediately intensified fears that Karen had become the victim of a horrifying encounter. News of the discovery spread quickly across the city, transforming the missing person investigation into a race against time, as authorities searched desperately for answers hidden inside the silent walls of the abandoned building. The abandoned warehouse sat at the edge of the industrial district like a forgotten relic from another era. Rusted metal doors creaked in the wind, shattered windows rattled against loose frames, and years of neglect had turned the once busy structure into a dark maze of empty rooms and silent corridors. Investigators flooded the property shortly after the discovery, carefully documenting every inch of the building while crime scene lights illuminated the surrounding streets through the night. Residents living nearby watched from behind police barricades as officers carried evidence boxes in and out of the structure hour after hour. The atmosphere around the investigation changed immediately. What had once been a hopeful search for a missing student was now treated with grave urgency. Inside the warehouse, detectives discovered personal belongings linked directly to Karen. Her handbag had been found near a stairwell covered in dust and debris, while other items were located deeper inside the building near an isolated storage section. Investigators noticed signs that suggested Karen may have tried desperately to leave the property after entering it. Scuff marks covered parts of the concrete floor, and several disturbed objects hinted at a struggle having taken place within the abandoned structure. Officers worked carefully to preserve every possible clue, knowing even the smallest detail might explain what happened during Karen's final known moments. Forensic teams spent days processing the warehouse. Every doorway, railing, fingerprint, and discarded object was photographed and examined. Search crews wearing protective equipment combed through piles of old machinery, broken furniture, and dark corners hidden beneath years of dust. Outside the building, police expanded the investigation into nearby streets, vacant lots, and surrounding industrial properties. Helicopters circled overhead while mounted units and volunteer groups searched wooded areas near the river that ran behind the district. The city had become consumed by the mystery. Restaurants, campuses, and office buildings all buzzed with conversations about Karen's disappearance. Fear quietly settled over the community, especially among students who now avoided walking alone after dark. As pressure mounted, detectives reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage collected from traffic cameras, businesses, parking garages, and public transportation stations. Slowly, investigators identified a man who appeared repeatedly in areas connected to Karen's final movements that night. The footage showed him lingering near downtown shortly before Karen disappeared and later moving toward the industrial district around the same time frame. Although the recordings were grainy and incomplete, detectives believed the individual's behavior appeared suspicious enough to warrant closer attention. The investigation soon focused on a local man who worked occasional jobs near the industrial area and was known to spend time around abandoned properties. Detectives learned he had a history of troubling behavior that had previously drawn minor police attention, though nothing severe enough to place him on authorities' radar before Karen vanished. Witnesses recalled seeing him alone near the warehouse district on multiple late evenings. Several described him as quiet and socially withdrawn, someone who rarely interacted with others, but seemed familiar with the hidden pathways surrounding the abandoned buildings. Police quietly began surveillance while gathering additional evidence. Investigators searched through digital records, interviewed acquaintances, and retraced the suspect's movements during the days surrounding Karen's disappearance. The deeper they looked, the more concerning details emerged. Detectives discovered inconsistencies in the man's statements regarding where he had been the night Karen vanished. Security footage also appeared to contradict portions of his timeline. Although authorities had not yet made an arrest, many within the investigation began to fear they were uncovering a far darker story than anyone initially imagined. Meanwhile, Karen's family endured agonizing uncertainty. Her parents stayed in the city throughout the investigation, refusing to leave while search efforts continued. Every morning began with cautious hope, and every evening ended with crushing disappointment, as no confirmed sign of Karen emerged. Friends organized community vigils, where hundreds gathered holding candles beneath cold evening skies. Photographs of Karen smiling beside friends covered memorial boards near the university campus. Professors paused lectures to acknowledge the growing emotional toll spreading across students and faculty alike. The once lively college town now felt tense and haunted by unanswered questions. Then, nearly 10 days after Karen disappeared, investigators returned to the abandoned warehouse after receiving new forensic results connected to evidence collected inside the building. During a secondary search of an isolated lower section that had previously been difficult to access safely, officers uncovered evidence confirming Karen had remained inside the structure for some time after entering it that night. The discovery devastated investigators and family members alike. Detectives immediately intensified efforts to locate the primary suspect, believing the case was rapidly approaching a critical turning point. The suspect, however, seemed to sense authorities closing in around him. According to later reports, his behavior became increasingly erratic in the days following the renewed searches. Neighbors noticed him leaving home at unusual hours, avoiding conversations, and appearing visibly nervous whenever police activity occurred nearby. Detectives feared he might attempt to flee before they gathered enough evidence for an arrest. Surveillance teams followed his movements constantly while forensic analysts worked around the clock inside laboratories processing crucial findings recovered from the warehouse. Late one rainy evening, nearly 2 weeks after Karen's disappearance, police vehicles quietly surrounded a small residence connected to the suspect on the outskirts of the city. Detectives believed they finally possessed enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. Officers approached cautiously, as heavy rain poured across dark streets illuminated only by flashing patrol lights. Neighbors peered through windows while investigators entered the property searching for answers everyone in the city had been desperately waiting to hear. Inside the residence, detectives discovered several items that immediately intensified the investigation. Some objects appeared connected to Karen, while other findings suggested the suspect may have carefully attempted to conceal evidence following the night she disappeared. The atmosphere inside the interrogation room, investigators spent hours questioning the suspect, while teams of detectives continued analyzing evidence collected from the warehouse and surrounding areas. At first, the man denied any involvement in Karen's disappearance. He claimed he had been wandering through the industrial district alone that night, and insisted he had never spoken to her. Detectives, however, carefully confronted him with surveillance footage, forensic findings, and witness statements gathered over the previous 2 weeks. Piece by piece, the inconsistencies in his story became impossible to ignore. According to investigators later involved in the case, the atmosphere inside the room grew increasingly tense, as the suspect realized authorities had reconstructed much of his movements from the night Karen vanished. Outside police headquarters, reporters lined the sidewalks while camera crews waited through freezing rain for updates. The case had now become national news. Communities across the country followed every development closely, especially young students and families disturbed by how quickly an ordinary night out had turned into a terrifying mystery. Karen's family remained inside a nearby support center with counselors and close friends, anxiously waiting for information. They had spent days trapped between hope and heartbreak, refusing to give up despite the growing fears surrounding the investigation. Every ringing phone and every opening door brought another wave of anxiety. As questioning continued, investigators uncovered a disturbing timeline of events from Karen's final hours. Detectives believed Karen had accidentally crossed paths with the suspect while trying to make her way home through the industrial shortcut after leaving downtown. Authorities concluded that the isolated streets and abandoned buildings created a dangerous environment where very few people would have noticed something wrong during the early morning hours. Surveillance footage suggested Karen entered the warehouse area alone, likely unaware that someone nearby had been watching her movements. Inside the abandoned structure, investigators determined Karen became trapped within the confusing maze-like building after entering through an unsecured side access point. Detectives later explained that parts of the warehouse were poorly lit, cluttered with debris, and dangerously disorienting even during daytime. Evidence suggested Karen attempted repeatedly to find a way out while under extreme stress and fear. The suspect, familiar with the building's hidden passages and isolated lower sections, allegedly remained inside the property as events unfolded during the night. Investigators described the situation as deeply tragic and horrifying, emphasizing that Karen had fought desperately to escape the terrifying environment she found herself trapped within. Forensic evidence recovered from the warehouse played a major role in breaking the case open. Detectives matched key findings from the building directly to the suspect and confirmed he had been present in areas connected to Karen's final movements. Additional evidence discovered inside his residence further strengthened the case against him. Investigators also uncovered digital activity and witness accounts that contradicted nearly every statement he initially gave during questioning. Faced with mounting evidence, the suspect's version of events began changing repeatedly, drawing even greater concern from detectives. The city reacted with shock and grief as details slowly emerged. Candlelight vigils grew larger each evening outside the university campus where Karen had studied. Hundreds of students gathered carrying flowers, handwritten notes, and photographs while church bells echoed through nearby streets. Professors, classmates, and strangers stood together in silence, struggling to understand how such a tragedy could happen in a place many once considered safe. Parents began warning children about traveling alone at night, and city officials faced growing criticism over the neglected industrial district where the nightmare unfolded. Questions spread quickly about abandoned buildings, poor lighting, and security failures that residents had complained about for years. Karen's family eventually released an emotional public statement thanking volunteers, investigators, and community members who never stopped searching for her. They described Karen as compassionate, ambitious, and full of life, someone who loved helping others and dreamed of building a successful future after graduation. Friends shared memories of late-night study sessions, road trips, birthday celebrations, and ordinary moments that suddenly carried heartbreaking meaning after her disappearance. Many admitted they still expected her to walk back into class smiling the way she always had before everything changed. As prosecutors prepared formal charges, investigators continued uncovering disturbing information about the suspect's behavior before Karen vanished. Authorities learned he had spent years living an isolated existence near the industrial district and had become familiar with abandoned structures scattered throughout the area. Detectives believed this knowledge allowed him to move unnoticed through places most people avoided completely. Several investigators later stated that the suspect appeared obsessed with secrecy and control, often spending long periods alone inside vacant buildings where few others ever ventured. These discoveries painted a deeply unsettling picture of the man at the center of the investigation. Months later, the courtroom proceedings drew enormous public attention. Reporters filled every available seat, while Karen's family sat quietly listening as prosecutors reconstructed the chilling events of that night. Surveillance footage, forensic findings, digital evidence, and witness testimony combined to reveal the terrifying reality of Karen's final hours. The emotional weight inside the courtroom became overwhelming at times, especially when friends and family described the lasting pain caused by her disappearance. Many struggled to hold back tears while remembering the young woman whose life had ended far too soon after what should have been an ordinary evening with friends. Although the legal process eventually brought accountability, many people in the community felt the emotional scars would never fully disappear. Karen's story permanently changed the city. Abandoned buildings in the industrial district were later sealed or demolished, lighting was improved across isolated streets, and new campus safety programs were introduced to help protect students traveling late at night. Community organizations also launched awareness campaigns encouraging people to stay connected with friends during nights out and avoid isolated areas alone whenever possible. Yet even years later, Karen Buckley's story continued to haunt those who remembered the case. What began as laughter and music during a simple Friday night became one of the most chilling tragedies the community had ever experienced. For her family, friends, and countless strangers who followed the heartbreaking investigation, Karen was never just another headline. She became a symbol of how quickly ordinary life can change, and how one terrifying night left an entire city searching for answers, justice, and peace that would never fully come.